for joining me for the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. All right, well, it's Sharknado week here at the Plant Yourself podcast. Today we are talking about sharks. You know, it makes sense because one of the reasons we eat plants is that we love animals, and sharks are animals, and they've gotten some pretty bad press in terms of how much we want them around. But today's guest, James Sulikowski, is a shark expert, and he is an adventurer and a researcher, and we have a great conversation about sharks, in which I embarrassingly start out by asking if sharks are mammals. It turns out they are not. Neither are they fungi. I got that one right. But we talked a lot about their interesting lives, their different habits, how some of their behaviors could make humans think twice about wanting to kind of hang out with them. And we also talked about, shark research, how we know, what it looks like, how you get funded, how different interests compete in terms of research priorities and what the benefits are of all that research to us and to the natural world. And we also talked about the fact that I discovered James Sulikowski because his PR company is a pet food company. And one of the things that they do is try to get sustainable pet food from marine life, from fish. And, especially if you're a vegan who loves cats, it's pretty hard to keep a cat healthy on a vegan diet. So kind of talked about what is the role of fishing, of animal agriculture in keeping our oceans alive and healthy. And so I think there's something here to excite, titillate, scare, and piss off just about everyone. So without further ado, James Sulikowski, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
I am excited to talk about something that I know virtually nothing about, which is sharks.
Yeah, well, I know a lot about sharks, and I'm super excited to tell you all about them.
Cool. Like I don't even watch like the Discovery Channel shows, so I don't even know what the myths are that we need to be busting. I guess my first question is just sort of, for you personally, like how did you get into sharks? So for so many kids, like both of my kids at one point wanted to be marine biologists.
Yeah.
And like you are one, and you're studying something très cool. Like what was the journey?
It's an incredible one. My first sort of recollection of the ocean is when I was really young, like 5-6 years old. And it's not that I can remember that far back, but pictures of me at the beach. And one of them, and this is in Texas, in the Gulf of Mexico, was me on the beach beside a shark had washed up. And at that early age, I just become fascinated with anything sort of to do with water. And, as I went to college and then grad school, it's always been focused in on that environment. I've always loved it. I mean, I was a kid growing up, I did freshwater fishing and everything you can imagine to be outdoors. And it was a great, just natural progression for me to be, studying this charismatic marine species.
Hmm. And did you have to like pay your dues and study, plankton and like?
Man, it's funny because all my students that work for me or are interested in marine science or whatever, they're like, oh, I want to study, whales or dolphins or sharks or something really cool like that. But you pay your dues. When I was an undergraduate in college, my research was on freshwater algae. So, just getting that experience helped me kind of learn what was necessary to become a scientist. So although I was studying algae and not fish or shark, I learned the skills and techniques. And that sort of catapulted me into what I would be doing now, in graduate school, learning those sort of techniques. And it's definitely a process that you kind of pay your dues for.
And I imagine that, studying a species is all about it in context, its ecology. So can you draw a straight line between freshwater algae and sharks? Or?
Yeah, not necessarily. But what was great is that the fundamental sort of how you conduct research is the same, right? When you come up with, hypothesis, you test it. And although, on one hand, you're looking at a plant, right? You're putting together those methods, right? And you're learning a certain skill that kind of helps you down that path. And, with sharks, I still carry all those things that I learned, studying algae and in ways that you need to be thorough. And sometimes a lot of what you do, you don't like, or it might seem not to go the way you want it to go. But that path, although completely nonlinear, always gets you to some sort of area, which is exciting.
So when you started out and as a freshwater algae studying marine biologist, like what was the research agenda at the time? Was it just like sort of go in and learn about a species? Were there already like ripples around climate change? Because I know, some friends who are oceanographers were like some of the first people to say, hey, weird stuff is happening here.
So, I mean, that's a great question. I think that, my experience as an undergrad, so you can imagine, somebody who's, 19, 20, 21 years old is still really learning the basics. And to be part of a professor's research lab was really exciting and daunting for me. And I'm sure a lot of the students now, when they go to college, like, how do we get experience? And a lot of it's just reaching out to that kind of professor and getting those hands-on experiences. And it didn't really matter what it is, algae, fruit flies, sharks, as long as you're getting those experiences. And for me, we really didn't see the effects of climate change until probably it really started picking up towards the end of my PhD, when I was just kind of finishing up. And now when you look back at what I did then, this is, back in, 2003, 2004, all the research that I conducted probably needs to be redone because of climate change, because of the shifting movement patterns and how animals are using their habitat. So, it's frustrating, it's exciting, it's challenging, it's everything all kind of rolled up in one.
Can you give me an example of a research conclusion that you reached that's up in the air now? Or
yeah, so this is climate change, it affects every aspect of like an animal's life. And some of the aspects that I was focusing on was life history. So how old do they grow, how big they grow, how fast they grow, all these sorts of things. And climate change can have an impact on that. And so as the water warms up, animals tend to mature quicker and at a smaller size. And so now what you deal with is these changing life histories. And for a lot of animals in the ocean, we like to eat them, right? And in order to eat them, you have to do it sustainably. And in order to do it sustainably, you have to understand a life history. And so if they're constantly changing, then you constantly need to be updating your data. And so, yeah, it's one of those constantly in motion type of projects.
Huh. So sharks are mammals, right?
Sharks are not mammals.
They're not mammals.
No, sharks are fish.
Fish.
And so there's a huge distinction. And one is that sharks and other fish don't have lungs, right? That's a huge distinction. They have gills, so they breathe through their gills. And the other is that they don't have any hair. And so those kind of things really, are big separations between, sharks and a marine mammal like a seal or a whale or something like that. So yeah, much, 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 much different.
Okay. So they lay eggs.
Some do. Yeah. Some do. And that's part of what we study is shark reproduction, and it's fascinating and it's complex. And you've got all sorts of different arrays of reproductive modes. And so about 40% of sharks lay eggs like a chicken, except they don't sit on them and incubate them. They kind of let them go and lay them and they're gone. Then the rest of them, the other 60%, give live birth. So they actually carry the young like humans and like other mammals. And within that, you get all sorts of different weird ways in which mom cares for their babies. The most rudimentary is that mom basically is the egg case, and the eggs kind of dissolve inside her, and the babies grow up with a yolk sac. And when the yolk sac's gone, mom gives birth. Then you have a group that mom actually will produce eggs that the babies eat when they're inside of mom. You've got a mode where actual babies actually eat each other. So intrauterine cannibalism, it's absolutely crazy. And then you have placental, like we do. So it's a very complex, which is exciting for us to study.
Wow. So if climate change has disrupted their life cycles, so they're maturing sooner, they're growing smaller. Are there sharks for whom like motherhood or parenthood is like a big deal, where they have to teach things?
No, that's the thing. And most sharks are sort of mobile, right? So they can move. And this is where the complexity of climate change comes into play. So for the species that are sort of stuck in an area, animals, smaller sharks or fish that really can't make long distance migrations or movements out of areas, they're stuck in that environment. And that's when their life history really changes, right? For sharks that can move, what they're doing is they're looking for more suitable habitats to sort of give birth in. And so one effect of climate change is that these nursery areas where sharks give birth sort of are in flux and they change. And so where one area might be pristine, sort of secluded, is no longer habitable, right? Because of climate change. And they're looking for someplace different, which might be in an area of industrialization or high human impact. And then you start to get in some really, some issues along those lines.
And by issues, you mean like beachside panic and
so everything you can ever imagine, beachside panic. Also, if you look at urbanization, right? Urbanization can have negative impacts on an environment, right? You can runoff, pollution, whatever. And so, this area that might have the right temperature for that shark to give birth in may not have the other components that are suitable. So higher pollution can affect, that baby's growth, less food resources. And so it's kind of a cascading effect.
So there's some sort of like something brushing the microphone.
Is that better?
It's good now. It just happened a few times.
Sorry. I think it was me touching the computer.
Okay. Yeah, you're very animated talking about sharks.
Very exciting.
What, like if we see pollution, I've been reading about, various different pollutants and persistent organic pollutants and endocrine disruption.
Yeah.
Are sharks sort of a canary in the coal mine species when it comes to the effects of pollution on sort of larger animals?
Yeah, I mean, one thing about sharks is that, man, they've been around for over 400 million years, right? So they've weathered all sorts of incredible challenges environmentally. So they have a really great, resiliency to any of these horrible things that are kind of out there. There needs to be more work done on sharks, but what we've seen is that they suffer the effects, right? So you get sort of feminization in the males. You get, birth defects. You get everything that you can imagine that these disruptors would do does take place. But because sharks can kind of move, it's a good thing and a bad thing is that, they're in environments that have different levels maybe of these toxins or contaminants. But what we're finding some of the major issues is the sort of offletting of those organochemicals, whatever it might be, from mom to offspring. So the babies, even before they're born, right, they've already got a buildup of these contaminants. And so, for some species, that's a major issue.
You said like they can move. How do you have any sense of if they know or how they can tell that they're in polluted waters? Do like the fish they eat taste bad or?
No. So those are great questions. Some of the senses, I mean, the shark senses are absolutely phenomenal. right? I mean, that's how they are evaluating their environment. So they are evaluating temperature, they're evaluating smells, they're evaluating the amount of prey items, they're evaluating the health of those prey items to a certain degree. Um, and all these things come into play when you look at the overall health of those sharks and that ecosystem. And so sharks play a really important role, right? And a healthy ecosystem has sharks. But if that ecosystem is already sort of decimated, sharks will move and they'll look for other areas.
Hmm. So yeah, for those who are watching on YouTube, there's a picture of a shark behind you
Yeah.
that relative to its dimensions has a giant eye,
Yeah.
right? So
Incredible.
tell us about that shark and why the eye is so big.
So that's the poor beagle, and that's one of our focal species that we study. It's an interesting shark. It's literally it's a cold water shark, and it can control its body temperature much like a tuna. And so you find these from New England over the United Kingdom, basically, and everywhere within their distribution, they're an endangered species except for the United States. And their eyes are so big because they're an amazing predator. Now, the poor beagle, it's related to the white shark. And the way I like to describe this to people is that if you took a white shark and a mako, mako is the fastest shark in the ocean, and a white shark is one of the largest predatorial sharks. Put them together, you've got a poor beagle.
How do you spell that?
Poor, Por,
Okay,
and then beagle, Beagle,
like Snoopy.
like Snoopy. Yeah. And so that name came that it's porpoise shaped, right? But it's a great hunter, like a beagle. And so they put those two together, poor beagle, and there you got the shark. It's about a 11-foot shark, so it's not huge, but it's a great predator. It's fast. We're finding that it is probably one of the most cold tolerant sharks in the world, if not the most. When all other sharks are leaving, like New England and other areas, they stay for feeding and other things. So they're an incredible animal, but they go to these extreme depths. So that's not unusual for them to go from the surface all the way down to 3,000 to 4,000 feet. So that's a long way down. And so they're using these large eyes to find prey, to feed, to avoid predation. And so if you look at other sharks, the poor beagle, the other lamnids, these white sharks and makos, all have these giant eyes because they can go to these extreme depths to sort of look and try to find food.
So you're a scientist, so there's places that you don't go in terms of like conjecture, but I'm wondering just in terms of like theory of mind.
Yeah.
And like, can you talk about like what it might be to be a shark? Like what would,
Yeah.
you know what I mean by that
Yeah.
question?
No, I hear you. Yeah. No, it's one of those, I think, those, metaphysical type, thinking on how this animal lives and thrives in its environment. And sharks they are amazing predators, and they're geared to be amazing predators. So the minds of a shark are, finding food, and not being eaten, or to the two main things. Anything that's larger than a shark will find it as a prey item. And if you think about, orcas, sperm whales, there are a lot of things that have known to kind of feed and predate on sharks. So even if you're 11 feet long, other things that are looking out for you. So you are trying to find food, avoid food. You're using all of your senses, smell, tactile. They have electroreception. They have great visions, all the things that are just incredible underwater. And I say this to people all the time. Look, can you imagine, going into a pool and trying to smell a piece of pizza, or try to find, something without goggles under the water? It doesn't work, right? And our ears aren't set up to hear anything in any direction. And so sharks can do all those things, and they do an amazing job at it. And so that's what they're geared up to be, is these great predators out there. And the other thing is to find good habitat to do these things in. And they're constantly searching, constantly moving, constantly active to do this.
Hmm. So I know that one of the ways in which humans have um, polluted the ocean is with noise, right? If you say they have this incredible
Yeah.
hearing, what is like what are we doing in there, and what effect is it having on sharks?
Right. And so that's a great sort of segue into some of the work that's really coming into play over these last few years is how these noises affect animals, right? Who have these specialized, senses of hearing. And, sound travels 5 times faster in water, right? So, and it can travel, miles. And so people often equate to, hearing as to, a few hundred feet like us, and that might be pushing it, right? So it does affect them, and we're trying to figure out how. Like, you try to go green energy, right? Windmills, things like that. How does that affect not only sharks but the food that they're trying to eat, right? And if the food in that area is being affected, they're moving or distributed or whatever, that's going to affect sharks. And so sound is a really important thing, and we're spending more and more research now trying to understand kind of how that is affecting even boats, everything. It can confuse animals out there.
Has the pandemic year offered opportunities to do sort of natural experiments around that?
It has and it's one some that we're working on, because you had areas that a marine reserve or coastal areas that people were allowed to be in, but you couldn't fish and do other things. And so you take that component out. Now, how do animals sort of respond? And anecdotally, what we're seeing in some of the areas that we've conducted work is a enrichment of life, almost like they've come back to some of these areas in New England. It's been a banner year for poor beagle sharks, tuna fishing, whale sightings, sort of forage fish. So it's been an interesting dynamic for sure.
Hmm. Um, so we talk about noise. I mean, there's sort of industrial noise. I think there's a lot of sort of military things. There's commercial, and then cruises. There's like when I think about like who's making money in the oceans,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's those industries. Does your research put you at odds with them, or like do you get funding from them? Like what's the relationship?
No, that's a great question. So our research, I have colleagues that are working to determine those things, right? And to see how windmills are impacting distributions, what's the sound impacts, those sorts of things. Our research doesn't kind of go towards that so much. Our research really goes towards, looking at habitat, importance of habitat for animals at specific life history stages. So where do mom give birth? A lot of our work is focusing on mom sharks. People don't really think about sharks being moms, but they are. You know what I mean?
So
And
how do you do that? Do you like capture them and track them?
yeah, yes, multiple ways, which is great. And so capturing them and tracking them is ways in which we can do that. And the problem has always been like, all right, here's a shark, is it pregnant? And so in the past, the only real way to figure that out was to have to sacrifice mom, right? And look inside of her. But there's been an evolution of ultrasounds. And so just like a human or a dog, female dog that would go to the vet, we can now take this technology on a boat and we can look inside of a shark, and we don't have to, sacrifice her. And we can put a tag on her and we can track and see where she goes. And we're also developing another type of a tag. It's called an intrauterine tag. And this is the one that's super exciting for us. Imagine an egg. It looks literally like an egg. Okay. And we insert this to mom in her uterus, non-surgically. just like a canal that we stick this thing in, and this egg sits nestled with all of her babies. And when she gives birth and the babies come out, this tag pops out and floats to the surface and gives us a location where this is. And so this really is going to help us find these areas that are really critical, these nursery areas, and how they're changing with climate change, and, watching mom as she goes on her movements, on her path, how can we protect her in certain areas as well. And so this is sort of what our research does. And you asked about funding. And so we get funding from multiple different ways, but a lot of it is working through industry, private industry. And one that we work with is Earthly. It's a pet food company of all places, right? But they're about sustainability. We like working with sustainability focused people and companies who share our vision. And that drives a lot of our help in funding and in doing this type of work.
So you're, gosh, I have so many questions about that. I mean, just kind of like what it's like who goes and puts the tag.
Yeah, I know.
On the shark? Like, is that you sometimes?
Yes. And so, I have to say that these questions you're asking are, for not knowing anything, these are great. These are amazing, right? Because these are questions that resonate, I think, will resonate with a lot of different people. So because of my role, right, at Arizona State University, I'm also a teacher, a mentor. And so my job is to not only study sharks and find out where they go and help protect and save them, but also train the next generation of marine scientists. And so that's an important part of all of this, is training that next group. And so my students go out and do this work as well. And so I have a student who just returned from the Dutch Caribbean doing some tiger shark work. I have a student in Exuma, Bahamian waters, doing work on Caribbean reef sharks, right? And so they've been trained now to get out here, right? And it's part of their research to do these things. And it's a process, right? To make sure that this is carried on and continued and improved on.
So just for kicks, like, sharks swim really fast. They're really big. They could bite our limbs off. Like, how do you approach them? Do you like harpoon them with tranquilizers? Do you just like hold up a fish for them? And
no.
And I'm also hearing that I'm saying the word shark like it's one thing, and clearly it's dozens or hundreds.
There doesn't, exactly. And you're right. Shark is not a shark. So multiple species, multiple sizes, and each one needs to be studied individually. And that's why the tasks that we do are daunting, and take, the help of industries to fund it and whatnot. But imagine we're always evolving on what we do. And some of the things that we do are, catching the animal. And so we have to, we use hooks with bait on it, and they bite it, and then we bring them to the boat. And then we don't anesthetize them because that actually is bad for them. What we do is that we roll them over on their backs, and that puts them in what we call tonic immobility. So it kind of puts them to sleep.
Like a chicken.
It's sort of like a chicken. They just kind of just become really docile, and they kind of lay there. And we're able to.
Have any idea why? Like it seems like a weird.
It is, isn't it? I think it's sort of like a disorientation type thing. Whereas, they're not used to being sort of upside down. And we've seen this too. Some of the sharks that we released, if they're still in that upside down position, they just sort of like kind of go to the bottom and kind of sit there. You know what I mean? And we'll have to swim down there and turn them up on the right way. And then they snap out of it and they take off. It's absolutely amazing. But that allows us to work with mom without hurting her. And that's one of our biggest concerns is her health. She's carrying babies. And so we want to make sure that her and her babies are safe, as well as the humans who are doing that. So it's a big process, and everything that we do, how we handle the animals has been approved through our university vets and our research integrity systems. And so we don't do anything until everybody says, you know what, this looks safe for everyone. And so that's one aspect, because we have to actually, the tags go on like mom, like an earring on her fin. And so we kind of drill into there, we attach it, and then we send her off. and then after a couple of years, that those the nuts will fall off, and so does the tag. And so she loses her earring. But over those 2 or 3 years, however that long that tag stays on, we get some really good movement data from her. And so that's the one thing. But now we're developing these other technologies, and one of them is this underwater ultrasound, right? So we had to catch mom, and we've got an ultrasound, and we're probing her, and doing all these cool things. But now we can be underwater, right? And as she swims by, we can see if she's pregnant or not. And so this helps us understand ecotourism, dive sites. How are they being utilized? Are they important, for moms? And this is an area of our research which we're trying to build, for the, sustainability of all sharks.
So you have very close encounters with these creatures that are so different from us.
Yes.
Do you ever feel like there's a connection? Like, I know it's hard to imagine like what their cognition is and their reality is given all the differences, but like,
I'd say, just there is a connection. The connection, I think, is awe, right? That you have this just incredibly powerful animal, right? That could eat you at any time, but chooses not to, because we're not on their menu. They're not this crazed eating machine that is on a, vengeance to eat anything that's in its sight. I mean, in some of our work with this underwater ultrasound and getting it, field tested, we're still working with it, we're down with these, 12-foot sharks, 13-foot sharks.
You're not in a cage.
Not in a cage. And they're swimming next to us, swimming around us. I mean, as close as you can possibly get. And they have no interest in taking a bite out of me. And it's just amazing to be in their presence. It's terrifying, right? Because they could, if they wanted to, there's nothing we could do, that they don't choose to do it. And that's part of, our message is that, sharks are polarizing. Most people are terrified of them. Some, are on the other end, like, wow, they're amazing, we love them, but there's not a lot of in between. And so we try to get everybody in between and understand how important sharks are. They're not this terrifying animal that's going to eat you, but they're really important to the ecosystem.
Gotcha. But has there been an increase in shark attacks, or is it just a question of, whenever, like, man bites dog?
Yeah, it's
sensational.
Yes, it's all sensationalism. I think if you go back and you look at, the last probably 100 years, globally, there's around 100, we call them interactions, or so, on a max year, maybe 150. And of those, you're looking at under, somewhere between 5 and 10 that are fatal, right? Globally, right? And, if you take a step back and just look at that, that they're not seeking us out as food items, because there's millions of people, hundreds of millions, maybe even 1 billion people that go in the ocean worldwide, right? And you've got 100 interactions. It just doesn't happen. And I love throwing this stat out. In New York, 3,000 people bite other people on subways. So if you're in New York on a subway, you got a decent chance of somebody biting you, right? Whereas, globally, about 100, bites occur from sharks. And it just, it doesn't really happen. And, oftentimes it's mistaken identity, in the wrong place, wrong time, more than not. And, sharks aren't out there to attack us, right? They're there to feed and to find food. And a lot of what they do are exploratory bites. And you get people who are bit on the leg by a 5-foot shark. But, when a razor sharp tooth goes through our skin, like, hot knife and butter, it leaves marks. So it's sensationalized big time.
So you mentioned that, like, the main focus of your work is to protect and save the species. I'm curious whether you think your work is helping? And if so, in what way? Like, given the human propensity to destroy and neglect,
Yeah.
like is the knowledge that you're creating moving the needle anywhere? And if so, where and how?
No, those are great questions. I would say absolutely. The work of what we do and the work of our colleagues are helping us understand um, not only where sharks are going and why habitats are important, but also mitigating some of our interactions with them. A lot of what we do is we look for, helping the fishing industry, right? If a shark is caught and it's illegal or unwanted, it has to be released, right? And so we're looking for ways in which we can develop better handling practices, right? Or areas, hotspots where we can avoid shark interactions at certain times of the year. So those things are really helping, shark populations. Understanding which animals can be commercially harvested and which ones can't is a big part of it too. And so it's all related to a better understanding of individual species.
Hmm. But I might say, cynically, that for most industries, their goal is profit. And I haven't finished Seaspiracy. I don't know if you've seen
Yeah.
the
Yep.
movie yet, but
Yeah.
there's a scene up near the front where there's a type of shark, I think in Japan, where it's all lip service about saving it, and
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely. No, you're right. And so I can speak from a United States standpoint. We do our National Marine Fisheries Service, our federal government does a really good job of regulating what happens in the United States. And we've actually had shark species on the increase, which is good. And now it's how do you manage that increase when versus other species that are out there, and that's a good complicated thing to have to worry about, right? But you're right, there is a lot of lip service out there. There are certain countries, there are certain areas in which it is about profit, right? And that's a major problem. And I'll tell you what's complicated about that is this is for some of these countries where it's artisanal, right? And they depend on that resource to feed their families or to support their families, is where it does become complicated because, if some of those species are on the decline, what do you tell to that? What do you tell them? How do you get that message to them that if you continue to fish, you won't have anything, but that's the hard part, because they're looking at right now, how do I feed my family? And so working with those groups is really important as well. So it's a complex matter, particularly when you get outside the United States.
hmm. Yeah, and so you mentioned, that you work with Earthly, and so let's say that's the great white in the room. So this is a podcast, plant-based. There's a lot of my listeners who are vegans, ethical vegans, and so you're saying that part of conserving species involves catching them, killing them, and eating them, right? Is that kind of the only way, do you think?
Uh, uh, I would say that preserving them, you have to understand. It's complicated. You have to understand their biology for number one, right? And if you can understand the biology, you can get a better understanding of, can you fish them or not, right? And for some species, they're at the stage now where you really can't. And those are either no take or other very strict management measures are put into place. On the flip side of that, you have some that are doing really well, and that they can be harvested and used for all sorts of different things: fertilizer, dog treats, food. And that's the goal when you have something that is utilized, right? Is that there's no waste, that it's fully sustainable, and that it's utilized as a resource in any way that it possibly can. And I'll give you the example is dogfish. One way in which you manage a population is you set a quota. for how much can be taken out, right? It's just like farming or, you know what I mean? Anything, there's always like some sort of quota or how much land you can use. And for dogfish, the quota right now we'll say is 30 million pounds that can be removed from the ocean to make it sustainable. Right now, that fishery only removes about 16 million. So half of it is still not even removed from that quota. So the other 15 is remaining in there. And so we are trying to figure out ways in which, that underutilized species can be better utilized. Take pressure off of individuals or other species that can't be utilized. And I think that's a lot what we do. But we also, what we're interested in is finding alternatives to that, right? So seaweed, for example, or kelp, what can that be used for? And can it take some of the pressure off of, dogfish and go a different way? And so I think all these things are an important part of the complexity of what we are constantly kind of working with.
Yeah. To my untrained ear, 30 million pounds sounds like a lot. And, I'm thinking about as a gardener, if I just keep, planting seeds, harvesting, and I don't give back to the soil, it's going to be depleted. In the past, humans who ate fish lived on the coast, right? And presumably, they would poop and die, and eventually all the nitrogen would get back.
Yeah.
Are we in danger not just of overfishing by decimating populations, but actually removing, messing with the nutrient balance in the oceans?
Right. And that's a really good point. And I think part of it too is when you look at most of the management strategies now are going to from single species management. It's like, how do we manage, species X? How do we manage species Y and Z? But how do we do an ecosystem based management? What do we need for that ecosystem to stay balanced? So, for example, let's say you have, a plant that's really important, right? Then you have fish that might eat that plant. Then you have the fish that might eat the fish that eat the plant, and so on and so forth, right? Now, if you remove that plant, right, you destroy the ecosystem. If you, remove the predator that's controlling everything at the top, then you'll mess up that ecosystem, right? And so finding that balance is really important. And that ecosystem-based management strategy, right? Make sure that, you don't over-harvest one, right? Which will cause a cascading effect down that trophic level or ecosystem.
Right. Of course, my hackles go up a little bit when you talk about, management at all, right? Like the world has done fine without us for millions of years. And now we're, it's a little hubris to say, well, now let's go in and manage this.
Yeah, it is. Honestly, this is a funny thing you brought that up. I was just talking to my wife about this morning, and you're right. We humans screw things up all the time, and I think the strategy of trying to bring some sort of balance back, to our, whether it's agriculture, fishing, to bring some sort of management to those resources from an ecological standpoint, I think is the best we can do right now, as far as looking for some sort of stability in these things. And we've seen populations crash, which we're learning from our mistakes and we're understanding it better. But climate change throws a wrinkle in all these things, right? Once you think that you've got something in balance, all of a sudden climate changes and you've got species moving in from the south to the north, being competitors now, maybe an invasive species. And so this will be a constant challenge for us until we start to, make some changes as a humanity. You know what I mean?
Well, and we think about what we're managing and for whom. It's typically for either shareholders or voters.
Yeah.
Right. That when there's a species that scientists say they want to save and they can't articulate, what's in it for me, like the snail darter or the Amazonian tree, whatever.
Yeah.
um, there's not a lot of public support for it.
And what's even more frustrating on top of all of that, right, is that we're advocating for that darter or for that species of shark, whatever, on a shoestring budget, right? And that, we're basically duct taping stuff together to get this data out, which is really important, right? And getting it out to the masses and for sustainability and for saving species. But it's very frustrating to us, from multiple different standpoints.
Mm-hmm. So what can ordinary people do who are not, putting intrauterine eggs into sharks and swimming and advocating, Joe and Jane consumer?
Yeah.
Are there things we can do in our personal life?
Yeah. And I often get this question, I'm from Arizona. Why should I care about what happens in the ocean? Or I'm from Wyoming. Why should I care? We're all related, right? We're all connected, right? Look about the carbon footprint. What can you do as a human being to reduce the carbon footprint? What can you do, right? That's step number one, right? And changing your lifestyle gradually, right, is something that could have a major impact on the environment. Find a group, an organization, an individual, right, that you connect with, that you could support their work, right? Make a donation, right? Maybe it's monetary, maybe it's, hey, you know what? I got a boat. I'll take you out for free. I've got a place on the ocean that you could stay in while you do your work. All those things help, right? But there's a lot to choose from, and a lot, what are they doing? Right? Are they actively doing something? Are they training the next generation? Are they, going out in the field to actually collect the data that the government uses or some other entity will use to make decisions and policies, right? Find those individuals, support them, I think. And that, along with, making, individual lifestyle changes is, I think, what we really need.
Hmm. So there was a report that came out, I guess yesterday's in today's paper, about a climate report, right? That was like basically the world's on fire.
Yeah.
I imagine you're, getting those bulletins well before the rest of us. Do you have confidence or hope, or you're making predictions, or just like, damn the torpedoes and I'll do the best I can? Like, where's your heart in all this?
Yeah. My heart is that we will make change. That's my heart, that you hope that is the action that's going to take place. Right now, when you see everything that's going on, it's hard, right? To be looking at it from your perspective, right? When you're reading it in the newspaper, but also to be living it, right, on the ocean, to actually see it in our research. So I think that, reading these new papers and this stuff, we damn the torpedoes, man, I think is always in the back of everybody's mind. When are we gonna make the drastic changes that we're gonna need to do? What are we gonna do in order to get us back on a normal track?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question.
I know it is, isn't it? I mean, it is. It's frustrating, for sure. The area that I study, one of the areas I studied, the Gulf of Maine, it's warming faster than 99% of the rest of the world. So it's a scary thing.
So yeah, I don't think so many people who listen to this podcast are climate deniers, but I live in North Carolina. I'm surrounded by them. There's plenty all over. From your, we can read the reports and the studies. Like, can you talk about, from your perspective, behind your eyes, what you have seen that says this is real and it's a big problem?
I mean, look, you've got great, like you said, research that's out there. I mean, unequivocal, right? I mean, the Gulf of Maine have been studied, by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute for tens of years, and they've got great data that's shown it's warming like it is. We see species, you know, in areas where they shouldn't be, right? We see warm water species in the Gulf of Maine, right? Where it's these animals should be shocked and dead, but yet they're there, right? We're constantly seeing this gradual movement up, range expansions of species, range contractions of those that can't move. They're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, their area of habitat. And eventually what happens is that they, become extinct, right? And so, I mean, this is all over the place, not just the Gulf of Maine. So, for us, it's frustrating, right, to see a lot of the stuff go on, and some of these slow reactions. So we'd like to see, this change. We'd like to see, us working together, not only as a United States community or North Carolina community or Arizona community, but, a global community.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let's talk a little bit about Earthly, just so my vegan listeners can have a sense of where you're coming from and how actually eating sharks can be compatible with saving them. A lot of vegans I know have cats.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think those cats can be vegan.
No, I don't think so. Right. And so Earthly is a great example of, a company that's about environmental consciousness, right, and sustainability, and moving away from using species that aren't so sustainable, right, or maybe questionable. And a good example is, this dogfish treat that's being developed is taking the place of a cod treat, which that species has had some issues over the years. And so looking for different ways in which to fully utilize things, different products, different species, is a really important when you talk about sustainability and eco-friendly. And we really like that about Earthly. And this is sort of why, we're like, hey, this is a good company. They kind of see our vision. And you're right. It's also nutritious. It's also well-balanced. Things for our pets. I can tell you, our dogs, I have a pug and I have a Boston Terrier, and they absolutely love those like the dogfish treats that they did, the sort of like a preliminary, product review of, and it was phenomenal. They loved them, and it's something that would have been tossed out and thrown away.
Uh-huh. So just to be clear, the dogfish isn't just for dogs and catfish isn't just for cats, right? Those
exactly. Yeah.
They weren't named for that.
No. And so the dogfish actually gets its names from the spiny dogfish, which is this the most ubiquitous shark species there is, literally in the world. It's found all over the world, and super resilient, very sustainable, very well managed in the United States. When I've been studying for 20 years.
Mm. You mentioned at the beginning that you're studying life cycle, and I'm curious about longevity of different shark species and how it's been affected by climate change.
Right. And so like highly variable on the species. You've got, Greenland shark, which is purported to be 400 years, right? I mean, that's like an oak tree, right? It's incredible. And then you have other species that, don't live quite as long. Some, 12, 15 years, others, in the 50-year range. Climate change, we're still figuring that out on how it's affecting longevity and overall sort of like growing old, right? Where climate change is having the most impact is the finding suitable habitat, right? And if you can't find enough suitable habitat, then that will drive down population sizes, right? And those are some of our most major concerns right now when you talk about climate change. Mm-hmm. But if these animals are living these long lives, right, and they're constantly in distress, right, of different temperatures. They have to spend more energy on metabolism and other things. It's going to affect growth. It's going to affect longevity. And I think at some point, if we don't change something, it's going to really catch up to a lot of these species.
Hmm. Are there social shark species?
I mean, that's a really good question. You know, I'd say yes and no. Sharks tend to form these sort of loose aggregations in a sense. They're kind of all around, you know what I mean? In an area that's got a lot of resources and whatnot, but they often don't come together very often. You have some species of reef sharks that will, kind of congregate at certain times of the day, right? And then feed at night, right? Disperse, come back, disperse. Spiny dogfish, we'll go back to them. They get their name because they travel in giant packs, like a dog. I mean, giant packs, like you're talking tens of thousands at once, just sort of moving together, right? Wow. And you have others that are much more solitary, and trying to kind of do their own thing. So, yeah, sharks are fascinating, and, from just about every angle that you look at.
Gotcha. The more or less social ones, do we understand how they communicate with each other, or if they do, or what they say?
Again, what we understand, it's gesture, like body sort of gestures, and ways in which they're presenting themselves, sort of like scrunched up, is sort of aggravated, right? Swimming erratically, like around an area, very aggravated or agitated. There are some species of non-sharks, but still within that group, right? Stingrays and whatnot, that communicate through electrical impulses. I'm not sure if that's been shown in sharks yet. They also do a lot of pheromonal, hormonal stuff, senses, things like that. So, but as communicating, like, hey, what's up, Joe? I don't think so.
Okay. What about in terms of mating? Do they have dances or pheromones?
It's pheromones for sure. And I would say, you could say kind of like a dance, whereas mating in sharks is extremely, extremely violent. The male has to they have internal fertilization. And so males have these two copulatory organs. They stick out from their pelvic fins. They're called claspers, and they insert those into the female. And actually inject sperm, and it goes up and it fertilizes her eggs, and she gives, develops either an egg case or a baby that she gives live birth to. But the male has to pin her down. And so imagine their sharp teeth, right? Females will develop skin that's, up to 3 times thicker than normal during the mating season. She's got bites all over her, all beaten up. And so males and females tend to stay apart. They segregate until mating season, typically, because of how crazy and violent that is. And some of our work in the Bahamas on tiger sharks has kind of shown that, there's this area that's a female aggregation site, to sort of exclude kind of males potentially, for safety, for lack of a better word.
So I guess you never go down there wearing a shark costume during mating season.
Probably not a good idea.
Wow. And that's so interesting, because it's, when we think about how we want to portray animals that we want to save, we want to make them real cute and cuddly and, anthropomorphic. And there's this kind of inconvenient detail.
Yeah. They have big teeth. Yeah, exactly. No, it goes back to, look, they serve a purpose, right, in the ocean. That purpose is to, in reality, keep other populations stable, keep ecosystems in balance, and they tend to eat the dead and dying, right? So they make the other groups more fit.
And they eat the dead and dying because they're easier to catch.
Easier to catch. Sharks are kind of lazy to a certain degree. It's like us wanting to cook a 5-course meal. It sounds amazing, right? But if I can go to a restaurant, and get the same thing, why not? It's the same kind of concept, right? To eat the dead and the dying, a lot less energy, a lot less chance of being injured too. while you're doing that for a lot of those species. So they love to scavenge, and eat stuff.
Huh. Very cool. Anything else I haven't asked about that do you think people need to know about sharks?
I think that, just the concept of, we are not on the menu. They're not out there to sort of eat us. And when you're in the ocean and you're kicking around and swimming, you're probably surrounded by hundreds of them, right? And they just have no interest in us. And that if you're really worried, just don't go out at dawn or dusk. Don't go swimming in areas that have a lot of the prey items. Don't go swimming near a seal colony or in a school of fish. And don't go out by yourself, at those times. And you can significantly reduce your chances of any kind of interaction.
Got it. Good advice. If people want to follow you and your work, where can they do it?
So they can go to Instagram or Facebook. It's Sulikowski Lab or at Sulikowski Lab, or my website at Arizona State University as well. And so a lot of great information about what we do, how we mentor the next generation, the research projects, and how they can get involved, and help donate and whatnot.
Great. I'll put those links in the show notes. And if people want to find out more about Earthly, where do they go?
They would go to Presidio Pet. And that would be the link that would take them and learn it. So Presidio is an Earthly or same parent companies. And I think the Earthly may have just started their own website. So they can probably Presidio Pet or Earthly would take them to the understanding of this.
So it sounds like a Google search for Earthly would be
probably, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I've from starting out thinking they were mammals, I think I've learned a great deal.
Yeah, no problem.
If you gave me the test you gave your ASU freshman, I might pass now.
I think so. I tell you, your questions are really good, inquisitive. So you'd probably in the A range.
Sweet. I've always been a grade grubber, so I might get something now. James Sulikowski, thank you for all you do, for sharing it with the world, and for taking the time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Me too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Hope you enjoyed. Boy, did I love that statistic about 3,000 people biting other people in the New York City subway system. That is a visual that I think will stay with me for quite a while. So let's see what's going on. In garden news, the growing is slowing. That's a rhyme. We actually got a couple of real tomatoes. And the grapevine, I put some mylar tape up to scare off too many birds, so maybe we'll get to share some scuppernungs with them this year. And I've been doing a lot of clearing of paths, of weeding, and pulled out a ton of peppermint, which makes me a little bit sad, but it will come back, and laying down mulch. So kind of taming it and getting it ready for a fall season. We got some baby kale coming up, and looking forward to lots of greens. In movement news, still got the knee thing going on. I am doing the morning workouts, and I've taken to doing them sort of lighter weights and faster, and then really focusing on form when I'm going slowly with heavier weights so that I can rehab my knee. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Bennett, Gila Sert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Chawley, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Koppel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayad, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fenny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Billbury Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Trisha Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarit Hagen, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.